Okay, in our last video, we left off by completing a code behind exercise where we put in this hello world script that we see right at the bottom of the page into our project. And I'm just going to jump over to Visual Studio, kind of like refresh us here. So we had our code behind Aspx page, and then we automatically had created one that sat behind it that holds the C# code. And then what we did is we added some code to the page load method within that class file that triggers automatically when the application loads, and then changed dynamically the text inside of the object called label1, or that has that ID. And if you look at your Aspx page, you notice that here is that object with that ID. So what we are dynamically doing is changing its text property by using the C# code on the back end. And I'm just doing that so we can refresh where we left off last time. And the book kind of goes through and explains that. You can see I have a couple highlights in here that indicate that. The other thing that I want to show you here, and you can see I'll have highlights in the book as we go. Notice that little underscore. And for those of you that have been in the Intro to Programming class or have done Microprogramming Advanced, if you're in software programming, you'll have seen this before. When you're working inside of Visual Studio, and notice the code that we're looking at here, this is actually Visual Basic code. So that really only applies to Visual Basic. So if you're looking at this going, it doesn't look at all like my code, you're right? But in some circumstances, if you do code in Visual Basic and you ever see an underline on a line, that's the way you can continue your code on the next line, so if you're ever curious. But one of the other things that I want to show you here is that when you get past the header and the footer of that method when you're using Visual Basic, the code inside is actually identical. Isn't that interesting? So really, once you've learned C# and a lot of the syntax for it, when you're actually performing actions, it's very much like Visual Basic. So if you've learned Visual Basic, switching over to C# is not that bad. It's just that all of a sudden you have semicolons and curly brackets wrapped around things. Where in Visual Basic, that's not the case. In fact, Visual Basic, the reason you have to put this little mark in here is very simply because it's a language where you don't have a terminating semicolon. So a statement exists on a line. Now if your line gets really long and you start losing it, you can put in that underscore and then continue stuff on the next line, and it's considered part of the next line. Not true in C# though. C# is like Java or C++ in that you can span many lines. It does not care about white space. The thing that terminates is that semicolon or closing a block of code with curly brackets. So I think that's kind of interesting. All right. One other little thing that you want to take a look at, and let's go ahead and do this. You can see that they're looking at the site property pages, and we're going to bring this up for the particular page that we just built. But I'm going to tell you right now that the interfaces look a little bit differently, right? You can see that this looks like more of like a Windows 7 or Windows 8 kind of interface. And since I'm using Windows 10 and I'm using Visual Studio 2017, we're going to see something that looks a little different. So if you are going to take a look at the properties here, and notice it says you can assign the start page by right-clicking in Solution Explorer, right? So we already learned how to do that. Was that in this class? Or was that in the other class? That was the other class. So that's kind of an interesting thing, because when we launched this page the other day, we launched it directly by doing this. But notice that they have this option here for set as start page. So even though you can create files that are index files or default files or whatever within these projects that should load automatically on a web server, if you hit the root URL of a folder, we have the power within any .NET application to designate what the start page is. So it does not have to go to index or default. You can make any page the start page. So by just very simply clicking that, what it'll do is it will actually add a property, and I guess the interface isn't all that much different. And they're looking at the start options here. So if we looked at the start options, we can actually come in here and actually manually designate the page. But I'm just going to tell you from a practical standpoint, in all the years I've worked with this product, it's so much easier just, which one do I want to start with? Okay, that one? All right, good, done. Right, rather than have to navigate into that interface. However, the one thing that I want you guys to be aware of is that whenever you're dealing with any sort of object within a project like this, whether it's on the project level, the page level, any of the files within, or even objects within the page, very often you can bring up a property window and contend with it somehow. So on the site level, we kind of don't think about the site as having properties, but you know what it does. And you can go through this interface here and start looking at some of those options. So if you're just curious, and I will tell you this is kind of a deep path to travel and learn all the different features, but it's not bad to at least take a look and kind of get an idea of what's out there. And the reason the author is doing this is basically to point out the fact that you can right-click, set start page, or you can come to this interface and do it too, same difference. And if you really have a project that's getting complex, where you have, you know, numerous nested folders and hundreds of pages, that does happen. It seems weird, but it does happen. You might be better off doing it from this tool, is I think kind of the guy's point. But you can see that you can change a bunch of options here. And I'm not going to read them to you. I think you guys are capable of doing that on your own. But notice that, you know, we use the default web server, which is the one that's built into the product. But if you had a custom web server, in other words, if I had like a real Windows server that was running as a web server, I could designate the URL here. And what would happen is we would set it up so that it would propagate to the server, and the server would render it for you and then feed it back to your machine. For what we're doing, it's completely irrelevant. But if you were working on a real live project that got complex.
Where do you get the Windows? Do they have an ISO you can download or purchase to download? Or what do they do?
For the web server component? Oh, IIS is built into all versions of Windows since Windows 2000. It's just included.
So if you want
Doesn't
to build
matter.
a server, you just build it off IIS.
Yep.
If you wanted to build a Windows server.
That's exactly correct. IIS, Internet Information Services, is the acronym. When we launched the internal server within the .NET environment, Visual Studio 2017, by default it will run the Express version.
So then if you did that, would your server be added to just an array of their servers?
Well, your question's probably a little bit more complex in the scope of this. Maybe. You know, it depends. But if you're like attaching to a local server, if your own machine is a server, so for example, some people do that. They'll run a Windows server right on their own laptop or desktop, and you already have one running. You could propagate the project to that environment in order to render the page when you hit the play button. I really don't see the necessity for that unless you're really intent on running a Windows web server. Okay, but it is possible. And if you're curious about that product, it's part of every version of Windows, but it's not enabled by default. In order to actually enable it, you want to go to your control panel, and this is really not the path I wanted to walk right now, but if you're curious, okay, so why am I not getting it? Let's do that again. There we go. Comes up on my second screen, of course. You would go to your programs and features, and then this little link here, it says Windows features on or off, and you just navigate into this environment, and then you'll see that there's an option for Internet Information Services, and then you can just enable these components. And you can see I have black marks in there, which means that they're enabled for some things and not for others. But then you're, responsible for managing a server, if you go down this route. So if you're curious about doing that, please explore. If you have no interest in that at all, because you just want to make the pages and you don't care about the server, then don't mess with it, because there is a little bit of it's easy to deploy, but the learning curve is steep to administer. So, but just be aware that Windows and don't quote me 100% on this, but my understanding is that with Windows 7 and above, the IIS is available in all versions of Windows, including the home versions, or the not professional or enterprise versions. And then if you have an older machine, like XP, it only was available in the professional versions. That might be true for 7 too. Like I said, don't quote me. I know Windows 8 and Windows 10 for sure has the full product, even in the consumer versions.
Full product and
IIS, yes. Built into Visual Studio, IIS Express, which is adequate for just testing pages like we do. All right, so the next little section here, they're going to talk about adding markup to your page. And one thing that you're going to notice here is they talk about how you can type in text, right, both in the design view or the markup view. And for the purists, like if you're used to working in a code view, it's kind of a hard mindset to change to start working in the design view. Like, wow, I can switch over to design view and type in my stuff. Well, in some cases, that's actually faster, believe it or not, because you're not worrying about tags, you're just typing in the content, okay? But they do have tools that will pop up depending on what view you're in. So let's just actually go make sure the Aspx page is up, which it is. And then if we switch over to design view, you'll notice that there's a toolbar that pops up that has kind of, and I'm going to say kind of, a WYSIWYG kind of editor. Where you can take your text and make it bold and experiment with it. And part of the exercise that's coming up is doing exactly that. So if I were to take a snippet of text inside the design view, highlight it, and hit the bold button, what tags would you assume it wraps around it? But which ones? Well, if I was just to take a piece of text and make it bold, what are the tags that do that? B or strong, yeah. Good. This is my HTML1 test to see if you guys paid attention. So at least you guys know that. Good. Yes, either the B for bold or the strong tag. The strong tag is one that, of course, comes from the HTML environment. And now in HTML5 is considered to have semantic meaning, even though it does style your things bold. So that's kind of nice to know. All right, so let's move on and go to the next try it out. And what it wants us to do is add a new web form and call it default Aspx. Now, where should we put that? Root of the site. So I'm going to take my book at this point. I'm going to move it over to my second screen, but I'll tell you which step I'm on. So right now, we're currently at the bottom of page 55, and I'm on step number 1. I'm going to come over here to the root of my project, make sure it's highlighted, and give it a right click, and then we're going to add a new item. Now I see that web form is already listed here, so I can just click there and add it. It will automatically create a code behind page. And the other option is that I can come up here, click add new item, and then find the web form. And if you're worried about it creating the wrong thing for you and not creating the code behind page, just always go to this interface. But once you get comfortable with the tool and you see how it works, no reason not to use the shortcut on the right click. All right, so notice that it automatically named it default. Why on earth would it do that? I didn't type that in. Well, the answer is simple, because it doesn't have one yet. So in the root of the site, it kind of expects what you want an index page, right? Oh, excuse me, default page, because this is Microsoft. And then notice, because it's Aspx, and this is different, folks that are in the Web 2 class also, in that class, notice they did a lowercase d, which I thought was kind of strange, but it was default.html. This is .aspx. So in a ASP.NET application, the default Microsoft naming convention is capitalize the first letter of every word in a file name. Don't include spaces, so that's just what they do. We want to make sure that the code is in a separate file. That is really the preferred approach, but we are going to do a comparison of that also. Okay, so here we are, and we are in design view. Notice that this matches up with what's in the book, so we are on step 2. And notice how the cursor is flashing inside the page, inside of a div. And you can see at the top of that box, and I know it's very small on the screen, right above where the cursor is flashing, that it says div. So if I were to switch to the source code view, notice where my cursor is flashing there. So it's no coincidence. It pre-created the page, created all the constructs, and then it created a div in the middle, waiting for us to type something in. All right. Next thing that we want to do is we want to start typing. So let's go back to the design view. They want us to work in the design view on purpose here. And let me tell you why. The basic answer is if I'm here, do you guys notice that like WYSIWYG text toolbox went away? So a lot of the toolbars that you get are context sensitive like that. Now it is present. All right, so let's just go ahead and type in, hi there, visitor, and welcome to Planet Rocks. How appropriate. All right. Now they want us to not only type that in, but highlight the text using the mouse, just like in a word processor. And then it says from the block format dropdown, which you'll see up here, we want to choose the format. So I always forget if it's this one. Oh, that's font size. Is it this one? Block format. All right. And we are going to make that an H1. Isn't that cool? Well, marginally cool. But we were able to type in plain text, and we didn't have to worry about typing in the H1s and getting our syntax wrong or skipping a bracket or forget the closing slash. You guys should know how to do that, but this tool is automatic that way. If you switch over to source code view and just take a look, not only did it drop in the H1 tags, but it also indented everything for us real neatly too. Here's a helpful little tip as we work, folks. If you ever have a document that's not formatted, so let's just say that stuff is like this, right? It's not indented at all. You can actually highlight your code and then do a right click and format either the selection, and there's actually, I believe, a way to format the whole page. I always forget where that one is. Format document. That's in the edit menu. And what that does is what I just did. It goes through and takes all your code and indents it for you if you nested everything correctly, and it makes it look beautiful. Isn't that cool? I love that feature. That's one feature that Dreamweaver could use. They have kind of a primitive version of it, but thank you, Microsoft. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to go back to the design view now. I'm going to click my cursor after the end of that H1. And then I'm going to go ahead and press enter. You guys see what happened? Well, you just put in a heading, right? And then you pressed enter. So you must want a paragraph. That's pretty common, right? So that's like just built into the tool. So now they want us to type in some more text here, I assume. And basically you want to type in the text that's shown in step number 5, figure 2-18. For those of you that need to see it, I guess here it is. So we're gonna type in all this text. So I asked you guys to do the same. I'm gonna actually type it in manually. Now you guys can give me a typing test. Oops. Notice how it turned the website automatically into a hyperlink? Did you guys catch that? Well, that's a pretty bold claim. I'm going to press enter again so I get a new paragraph. All right, so hopefully you guys have that done. Now, if we switch back over to the source code view, you guys will notice something that should look really close to what's inside your book, right? And notice all the things that it did for us automatically that maybe you wouldn't even think about doing. So for example, notice like in that first word in the first paragraph, which is the contracted version of we're, right? That it didn't put in an apostrophe. It put in this character code for it. I would wager that you guys probably don't do that in your HTML code. It really is supposedly the proper way to do it, because that way it cannot be misinterpreted by any of the servers, the clients, as being like an attribute for like a tag or something. Then you guys already saw that the link automatically turned into a link just by typing probably the .com is what triggered it. Notice that automatically closed the paragraphs for us. It automatically indented everything for us. The lines that are wrapping, because I have word wrap turned on, we get the little visual glyph, as they call it, to show you that you've moved on to the next line. Everybody good? All right, but now they want us to do a couple of additional things that we haven't done yet, right? And that is to match the formatting that they have in this image. So paying a visit needs to be red. That's already a link. And then this needs to be bold. So let's make those couple of changes. So I'm moving this back over to this other screen here. So paying a visit, and I'm going to do this in design view. The point is to work in design view to get you used to those tools and really get to understand that they're there. So what do we need to do to that? Change the color? Background color? Foreground color. All right. And what color? Some sort of red. Plaid, yeah. All right. And then we're just going to go ahead and say OK. And then reviews and concert pictures needs to be bold. So I'm going to highlight that and hit the bold. And then if we go back to the source code view here, you'll see that which tag did it choose to use, the bold tag or the strong tag? Strong. Interesting. But that's what it chose, so that's what we're using. And that's an excellent point. Now, the last little tidbit I just said I didn't record, so I'm going to kind of repeat myself, right? So notice that they created a span tag with a class, and then it automatically created a style up above. And yes, Colleen, you're right, that now I don't want my styles on the page, right? So yes, I could take that now and drop it into a style sheet. We haven't done style sheets yet, though, right? Not in this environment. But that's exactly correct. So when you're using that tool, it's creating what we call embedded styles that are at the top of the document, but on the same page. And you guys should know, really, for HTML5, that's not the ideal way to do it. You're better off, putting it in a style sheet. And the other thing is, you might choose that, well, auto style 1, well, maybe we could just call it red, or make it red, or something like that, and then throw it in the style sheet, and you can use it everywhere, right? Everywhere you need red text. In fact, maybe calling the class red text would work, something like that. All right. Now they want us to run it in the browser, so let's just go ahead and do that and see what it looks like, see that it works. And then you guys noticing at the bottom here in the output window, as this is running, and of course now that it's actually running, it went away, but it did create what we wanted, right? So the text is red, This is actually a link, and that's actually made bold by virtue of the strong tag. If you right-click View Source, which you guys should get in the habit of doing with these tools, I want you to start taking a look at some of the things that are a little bit different about .NET. Like, where did all this come from? Right? I mean, I hope you're thinking that. I didn't type that in. That was not in my code. I don't see it in my code. So where the heck did it come from? Well, the engine behind Aspx and the .NET puts that in because really what it's doing is it's creating some unique things here, and it needs some special tools to be able to trigger it as an application within the web server, and that's all handled automatically. These are not components that you would hand code, and you can see that it basically has what we call a unique like fingerprint, really. That's a pretty complicated string of characters, numbers, and special characters that identify it to the application, so it runs independently. I don't know if that's actually encryption. I think that's just a key. Yep. And now, when you guys are out looking at web pages on the internet, and this is where you start to educate yourself a little bit, and you get curious and you go, wow, that page looks really nice. How did they do that? And you right-click and you do a view source. And then when you start to see stuff like this, built in, so you can see div, class, ASP.NET hidden, input hidden, you see these view state things. It's going to trigger in your head automatically, this is ASPX. I recognize that. Just like when you might look at like a WordPress site and know the little telltale signs where you see like WP content and you go, WordPress. As far as I know, Tom, yes. So it's kind of interesting in and of itself, but let's go ahead and close the app. But what I did want to do is I did want to take just a real quick moment to look at this output window and notice that as the server is running, anything that we do on the page, anything that's happening in the background, it shows you all the little tasks that are running just to get that page up on the screen, right? And it's not a small list of things, is it? Yeah. So it shows you what's happening. And then if I switch the output over to build, and this is what we saw happening as we were running, we hit the play button, notice how it actually runs validation. Why the heck would it do that? To make sure it works, right? So in Web 1, you guys probably learned that you should take your code, go over to W3 Schools, find the validator, paste your code in, or upload your file, or whatever you do, hit the check button and see what happens, right? So what this is showing you is that built into the product is a validator. Now, if you guys have been monkeying around with the code on your own, and you did something like, where you break a tag, right? Notice a little highlight. So really, it kind of validates on the fly. Now, the one thing I want you to get in the habit of, though, is when you find these things, and I'm right-clicking when I should be regular clicking, is how do I now correct that? It's telling me what the problem is. Anybody have a clue? Well, yeah, I could type it in. But what's this thing? Do you guys notice that little glyph there? So what I'm trying to show you is it's recognizing that. Now notice it didn't recognize that. Let me repeat this, right? So I deleted the bracket. It takes a moment for the validator to realize that it's off. I can hover over it. It tells me what the problem is. But then notice the little glyph right here. What is that? Yeah. Okay. Now, that didn't work so elegantly, but what's supposed to happen is there's a couple of types of things that you do within this environment where it can also fix it for you. So that's kind of fun too. Is that cheating? That's a little cheating. All right. Correct. All right. All right. I want to pause the video here for just a moment. All right. So I'm moving down now to page 58 to the next try it out. And this is a fun one too. It says in the demos folder, create a new web form. So we're going to go to the demos folder and click on it once. And then we're going to right click. And then we're going to add a new web form. And this time I'm just going to pick it from this list on the right click. If you want, you can do the same thing. They want us to call it table demo. You want to type in the Aspx? You don't have to. Guess what? It just creates it anyhow. Automatically creates the code behind file, which is what we want. All right, let's click on the file to bring up the code. And it is in design view already, but just so you know that it did create all this stuff in the background. So they want us to switch over to design view and click inside the dashed rectangle. You can see our cursor's already there, so I'm not going to. And then we're going to come up to the table menu up here at the top, and we can insert a table. And this is a really fun tool, because if you guys ever learned how to do HTML tables, and you know how to code them, right? You need the table tags and the TR tags and TDs, and then you have like table head, table body, and all these other goofy ones. This is a great tool. It's something I think they probably lifted from Dreamweaver, because Dreamweaver always does this. And it's such a fun tool to use because it goes so darn quick. I'm sure they want us to choose a certain size. Rows should be set to 3 and columns to 2. So rows, we're going to up that to 3 and columns 2. I believe they just want us to leave everything else alone. And then go ahead and say OK. And then there you have a table. And I know in this view, in this recording, that's going to be kind of hard to see. But if you look really carefully, there's all these like dotted lines that show what you've created. If you want to like split things or just look at the source code, you can see that simple command very quickly generated a table structure for us. TR is a row. We got 3 of those. We got TDs, 2 inside of each, so that creates 2 columns. Isn't that a whole lot faster than typing it manually? You know, so even if you're going to go in here, you're going to tweak the table and change it, making something completely different. Boy, that's a real time saver right there. 2 rows or 3 rows, 2 columns isn't very big, but if you were doing one that was like 20 by 20 or something like that, boy, that would save you a significant amount of time because it just does it instantaneously. And yes, if you're creating a table that has nothing in it, hypothetically, or at least in principle, you should have something in it, so that's why they have a non-breaking space inserted in each one. Because sometimes if you omit that, some browsers will not render the table at all. Isn't that interesting? So, something good to know. The non-breaking space. And notice, I mean, they could have just typed space, right? Isn't that the equivalent? But see, that can be misread by browsers too. So that's one of the reasons why they force that in. All right, we're going to go back over to design view now. What they want us to do is find this little divider right in the middle of the table. You can see when I put my cursor over it how the arrow or the pointer changes to an arrow like this. And they want us to take that divider and drag it to the left. And then notice how you get that little visual prompt there that shows you how big you're making it. And what they want us to do is make it 200 pixels. And of course, the sensitivity of... Yeah. Okay, I got it. But yeah, it was a little bit of a challenge. Now, of course, if it's off, where would you go to fix it? Yeah, just go to the source code. But notice, it didn't add like a width to the TD, right? In the older versions of Visual Studio, in fact, if any of you happen to be using 2012 or 2013, I forget if it actually puts in a width there. But with HTML5, the rule on tables is you shouldn't put any of your formatting in the table. So you shouldn't ideally write, width or height or any of that stuff in there. You can use those old tags, but from a styling standpoint, they're considered deprecated. What they really want you to do is actually create a style entry for it and then apply it. Now, auto style 2 doesn't mean much to me, so I might say, you know, table column width or something like that, and label it something very verbose so I knew exactly what that was, and then I would probably grab that and move it over to my style sheet ultimately. But it did it automatically, right? Can't complain about that. All right. I'm moving on to step number 7. They did want to make a point, though, that if you're in this visual mode and you give it a right click, you can actually use all the table tools here. So if you needed to insert columns, just like you would on a spreadsheet, insert rows or columns above, below, left, or right, you can do all that right from this interface. Or you can come in here, you can choose modify, and you can split the table or split the cells. You can do all sorts of really kind of neat stuff there. It's all just a right click away. Or if wherever your cursor is located, you can also go to the table menu and find all the same options. Right? And what's nice about using that, and if you guys are used to using a spreadsheet, right? I don't know how much you guys are spreadsheet people, but you know, I was a big spreadsheet person from a long time ago. And those are tools you just get used to using, so that's why they kind of mimic it here. So that's kind of a nice little feature, I think. Now, they want us to put our mouse in the first cell of the first row, so that's up here. I just clicked in there. Always notice that when I'm clicked in, how it changes that little label right here to indicate where we are. So it says td.autostyle2. So it gives me the tag and the class, both, right? That's attached to it. And they want me to type in the words bulleted list. Then they want us to go to the second cell, and then they're indicating here, or you can click with your mouse, or you can use the tab key just like you would in a spreadsheet, and there it is. And it says from the format menu, choose bullets and numbering. So where's the format menu? Right there. And then we're going to do bullets and numbering. And then it's going to bring up an interface that, you know what, looks a lot like you're working in Microsoft Word or something, right? So their point here is to try to make this look user-friendly and kind of save you some hassles. But notice that they are actually on the second tab in here, so they want us to go to plain bullets, and then they want us to select this. And then go ahead and click OK. So what it did is it created the first one for us, and notice now we're inside of a different structure. What does it say up there? It says LI. Very interesting. So what kind of structure is that sitting inside of? Unordered list, right? Because if it was an ordered list, that would be a 1, right? One thing that a lot of people don't know is you can actually customize what the bullets are. And if you're using an ordered list, you can use some really advanced CSS, and that's really kind of a whole separate field of study, to use things like Roman numerals, or not start on the number 1, or use letters instead, or you can do all sorts of crazy things. So that takes a little bit of study if you're curious about doing that, but I'm just mentioning it so you know. All right. Okay, so then type some text like your favorite musical genre. So for example, punk, rock, and notice I'm pressing enter after each one. I'm just following what he's doing. Techno, gotta throw some metal in there, right? Country, disco, but this is Planet Rocks. Country and Western. Okay, there's some jokes that go with that. And maybe like a Norwegian death metal category. No, I'm really reaching, okay. as opposed to the Swedish death metal. Totally different. All right, so they want us to get a few bullets in there. So they want us to end up with 3 bullets. So I kind of overachieved here, but all right, I'm getting rid of them. All right, repeat steps 7 through 10, but now create a numbered list. So here I've created a paragraph by mistake. And so notice how I pressed enter twice there. Did you guys catch that? Because when I pressed enter the first time, it created another bullet, but I didn't want to do that. And word processors work the same way, if you guys didn't know that. And so now I'm going to do another thing, and this time I'm going to do bullets and numbering, and we're going to use numbers, and which numbers do they want us to use? Click the second picture, this one. Right, and I kind of skipped a couple steps here, didn't I? So here I am, Control-Z-ing my way back to. Okay, so what I was supposed to do, because I'm like reading ahead, is I'm supposed to say numbered list here, then tab over, then do a format, bullets and numbering. So if you read the instructions carefully, you wouldn't make that mistake. But I'm being a little cavalier here. So now they want us to add jazz, hip hop, and trip hop. Okay. Yeah, I guess so. Once again, that kind of wraps up this exercise, believe it or not. So hit play. Let's see what it looks like in a browser. Yes, the output window does not need to be that big. Not too bad. Right? You guys have something that looks at least kind of like this? Okay, good. All right, we are going to continue our work now. I am now on the last try it out exercise, which is at the bottom of, or excuse me, the top of page 61 in our book. And I believe it's the last one within this chapter. So I'm going to go ahead and close the browser and jump back over to Visual Studio so we can continue our work. They want us to open the table demo page. Okay, I guess we already have that going. If necessary, switch to design view, already there. And in the first cell of the third row, that's this one here, type the text link. All right. In the second cell, they want us to type the text go to the home page of Planet Rocks. And did you guys try that link? That's one thing we didn't do. It's actually a website. Yeah. Of course it is. You know, the guy's a web designer who wrote this. And then highlight this with our mouse. Not the whole table. I'm going to use my keyboard here to do the highlight. On the formatting toolbar, it says click Convert Hyperlink button. So if you're going to see that there's this little link right here on the toolbar that I'm hovering over right now, which is kind of like the tool we have in Blackboard, if you guys have ever done that when you submit homework. And if not, you're going to have to learn how to do that. And then we need to type in some text. So instead of actually typing it in, what they're going to do is they're going to have us click Browse. And what we're going to do is we're going to choose the home page of our site, or I guess what will become the home page. So we're just choosing default ASPX, and then we're going to click OK. And then we're going to click OK again. And it turned it into a link. Now what I would recommend at this point is that you do switch over to your markup view and take a look at what happened there. And then I also want you to pay careful attention to the fact that not only is it pointing to the page, but what does the ... do? Yep, it tells us to go up one folder first, because you got to keep in mind The table demo is inside the demos folder, so to be able to get to the default, which is in the root, we have to go up one folder level first, and that's just the syntax, and it did it all for us. We didn't have to type it in. Isn't that great? So anytime you want to point to like a resource within your project, you don't have to guess. You can just use that tool, and it'll do it for you. All right, now I'm on step number 8 on the bottom of page 61. And it says here, if you want to change the page being linked to from markup view, click somewhere between the opening and closing quotes, and then press Control Spacebar. You see that? So I held down my Control key and hit the spacebar, and it brought up this little menu. And then I can switch to a different link, like that. So I'm going to do that again, Control Spacebar. Yeah, well, that didn't like that, did it? Okay, Control Spacebar. And then you can go in here and pick a URL. So these tools are available. And what the author does, and he does this just to show you what all the different methods are. And some of them you don't discover over time. So one of the nice things about using a book like this is that you get to learn all the little tricks along the way. Sometimes that can be a little overwhelming, though, when you're like, how do I do that? What did he do? There's 10 different ways. Which way should I pick? Well, the bottom line is you pick the way that works for you, really. And remember, you can always go to the code editor and do it manually. All right. So let's go ahead and go to the table demo thing, right-click, and view in browser, a different way to launch it. Right, and then of course, we should be able to click on this and take us back to the default page. All right, folks, and with that, we are basically all set and all done with this chapter. And he's got a couple little things at the end of the chapter you might want to read through, including a summary. I think the summaries are really helpful when it comes time to studying for tests and quizzes. Not that I'm giving you a hint, but I'm giving you a hint. You know, it's not a bad place to look for materials. And that really completes this chapter, so we are going to move on to another video, and this video ends here.